The fashion industry is one of the most resource-intensive and polluting industries in the world. It contributes to environmental problems like climate change and water scarcity. If we really want to tackle these environmental problems, we need to rethink our beliefs and start focusing on what actually makes a difference.
And after years of researching the environmental impact of clothing, one thing has become very clear to us. The fashion industry has been focusing on the wrong solutions. But the good news is there are simple changes we can all make that can reduce the climate impact of the clothes we wear.
And today we're going to help you make those changes. We will bust 3 of the most common myths about fashion's climate impact. So who are we? We are textile experts at IVL, Swedish Environmental Research Institute. And for the past years, we've been diving deep into the world of textiles.
We have studied the full life cycle of clothing, from raw material and production to use and end of life. And we have compared the environmental footprint of clothing when they are either reused, recycled, or incinerated. But now let's dig into the facts and challenge a few common misconceptions.
Our first myth is textile recycling will solve the fashion industry's environmental problem. You may have seen when walking into a store a t-shirt proudly labeled made from recycled material and wondered, is this t-shirt really better for the climate than a regular one? Well, the truth is that the difference in climate impact between a t-shirt made from recycled fibers and one made from virgin fibers isn't as big as many people think.
But before we explain why this is, we should clarify what we mean by textile recycling. So we're referring to fiber-to-fiber recycling. And this is where the fabric in a garment, for example, is broken down into textile fibers. And these fibers can be used for the production of new fibers used for new garments, for example.
So let's have a look at the climate impact of a new cotton t-shirt. In order to produce a cotton t-shirt, we first need to produce the cotton fibers through cotton cultivation. This is then followed by additional production steps. The fibers are spun into yarn, and the yarn is made into fabric. That fabric undergoes wet treatment and is then cut and sewn into a t-shirt. And we refer to these production processes as yarn-to-garment production. The impact from the production is then followed by transport, use phase, and managing the garment when it is thrown away.
So what you can see in this figure is that the fiber production only accounts for about 10% of the total impact of the t-shirt. And the yarn-to-garment production accounts for more than 70% of the total climate impact. And this yarn-to-garment production will happen even when you produce a t-shirt from recycled fibers.
And sure, the climate impact of a t-shirt made of recycled fibers can differ depending on the recycling technology. But even the best recycling technology can only lower the impact from the fiber production. And as you have seen, that only accounts for a small part of the total impact. So a great majority of the climate impact will still remain.
So should we then skip textile recycling altogether? No, we should not. There are many benefits to textile recycling. For example, when it comes to using less water and land. But the potential to reduce climate impact using textile recycling is limited, unless you also combine this with other actions, like reducing the overall production and consumption.
But what happens if we look at textile recycling from a bigger perspective? What would happen if we scaled up the textile recycling in Europe from today's less than 1% to 10% in 2035, so in 10 years? We studied this scenario, and the results show that the climate impact would only decrease by less than 1%. If we instead decrease our own clothing consumption by 10%, that would directly reduce our climate impact by the same amount, that is 10%.
So if you do want to reduce the climate impact from the clothes you wear, the most effective action is not to buy new garments of recycled material. It's to consume less, because by consuming less, you will directly cut the climate impact.
Okay, moving on to our second myth. Transports account for a big part of a garment's climate impact. Many of you may think that shipping clothes all the way from production in Asia to be used in Europe must leave a huge carbon footprint. But that's not true. The truth is that transport accounts for a much smaller impact than most people think.
So let's once again have a look at the climate impact of a cotton t-shirt's life cycle. So as you can see, transports only accounts for about 15% of the total climate impact. But of course, there are different types of transports. We have the transports in the production of the actual garment, and we also have distribution and retailing. And this is the transports from the production in Asia to stores in Europe. And both of these account for about 1% of the total impact.
So why is this impact so small? Well, most of the shipping is done by truck and ship, which are relatively efficient. Sure, if we would switch to air freight, it would be a totally different story. Flying clothes around the world would dramatically increase its carbon footprint. But that's not how the industry normally operates.
But here's the twist. Your transports as consumers can have a much bigger impact than you might think. It actually turns out that the user transport, this is the transport to and from the store to buy clothes, accounts for about 13% of the total impact. So this is the majority of the impact from the transports. And this means that when you take your fossil-driven car to buy a t-shirt, this has a bigger impact than the t-shirt's trip across the ocean.
So next time you're heading out to shop clothes, take a moment to think, could I walk, cycle, or catch the bus instead of taking my car? It might seem like a small change, but it actually makes a difference.
So, moving on to our third and final myth. Buying secondhand clothes will lower my carbon footprint. And you may be surprised that this is a myth, but it actually is. So it's true that the climate impact of a secondhand garment is much lower than a newly produced garment. But it's not enough for you to just buy secondhand. The key is that you actually use those secondhand clothes instead of buying new ones.
So let's have one final look at the climate impact of the cotton t-shirt. As you know by now, the steps involved in producing the t-shirt from the fiber production to the final garment accounts for a majority of the climate impact. By using a secondhand t-shirt, you would avoid all of these steps.
But let's say you go out and you buy a secondhand t-shirt, but you also buy a newly produced t-shirt. And in this case, you haven't really lowered your carbon footprint at all. You just added more t-shirts, in this case, to your wardrobe, and the climate impact from that newly produced t-shirt is still there.
What actually makes a difference is how much and for how long we use what we already have. If a t-shirt is used twice as many times before you throw it away, its climate impact can be cut in half. So in short, buying secondhand can lower your climate impact, but only if it leads to less consumption of new clothes.
So if you do want your secondhand purchases to reduce your carbon footprint, make sure you buy secondhand that you will actually use. So now we've presented a lot of facts, and based on these, what can you as consumers do? Well, the answer is not in the way you buy new clothes, but in the way you buy or use what's already been produced.
As a consumer, you can make changes that will have a big impact. But in order to make those changes, you have to focus on the actions that matter the most. So what you can do is have a look in your wardrobe and use what you already have.
And when you go shopping for clothes, walk, cycle, use public transportation whenever it's possible.
And when you buy clothes, new or secondhand, make sure you only buy what you will use.
So it's not only about buying smarter, it's about buying less.
Because when it comes to fashion and the climate, less really is more.